Welcome everyone. I'm Barb Jacobson, coordinator of Basic Income UK, and I'm very pleased to see so many people here. Just a few notes on housekeeping. We will keep everyone on mute while members of the panel are speaking, and we will take questions for discussion afterwards in the chat box. So if you do have questions or comments, please put them in the chat box, and if it's a question, use an uppercase Q so it can be seen more easily. There will be other information there, links to organizations, etc. And I would also ask that everyone please be respectful in your comments and questions. Since our time is very tight today, I will not give detailed introductions for each speaker. Short bios will be put up in the chat box, and later you can explore their work via links to their organizations. So why are we here talking about unconditional basic income? A substantial regular payment to each individual without means test or work requirement, and its relevance to women in particular. First of all, let me say that for many decades, some would say centuries, before this COVID crisis, society has been building up to an unprecedented ecological and economic crisis on many levels. War and extraction attracts more money and resources than peace and regeneration. Eventually, something has to give. The earth can't take it anymore, and neither can humanity. Inequality, and actually to my mind more importantly, insecurity, has intensified, especially in the last 40 years. Whether we're talking about income, wealth, housing, or food, while all are affected, this insecurity affects women the most, and Black and Asian women even more. It can be argued that this insecurity has been at the root of the attacks on women, Black and ethnic minority, immigrant, disabled, and LGBTQ people, as many in their fear and anger hit out at those closest to them or those marginally weaker than themselves, rather than aiming at those who actually benefit from the insecurity felt by most. The current crisis has exposed to a much greater extent the fact that the most important work needed to keep societies going is largely unpaid, underpaid, and insecure. It has also exposed the holes not only in our current welfare systems, but in the income support measures put in place during lockdown. Even many basic income skeptics have given their support to basic income at least as an emergency measure. Like other universals, such as the NHS and education, regular universal payments will help those with the least the most. During this crisis, mothers have been doing 50% more childcare than fathers. Women are statistically more likely to be low-paid key workers, while mothers are more likely than fathers to have lost their jobs. Black women and others from ethnic minorities are also more likely to be exposed to the virus as key workers, and we have seen that as health and care workers, they are also more likely to die from it. Women have also borne the brunt of the lockdown measures, not only with extra childcare, but also of domestic violence. The incidence of these had gone up before this crisis by 25% in the last 5 years. And since the crisis started, it's gone up by another 45%. An Asian friend who works at a women's refuge told me yesterday that in London alone, there have been over 500 domestic homicides in the past 3 months. While it is easy to complain about all this, I hope this conversation will help us focus on our power to change what has already been a crazy situation before this crisis. Equal payment to each person will symbolize our underlying equality as people and society's commitment that we all need to look after each other. To say nothing of being far more useful to both carers and those receiving care than a weekly clapping session. Universal basic income isn't all we need, but could provide a foundation for women and everyone to flourish and win the rest of what we need. Now, let me turn to Amelia Womack, Deputy Leader of the Green Party. First off, Amelia, I'd like to ask how you came to support basic income.
So it's been Green Party policy for decades to support a universal basic income. I think when I joined the Green Party, it was something that was new to me, but something that I had a very specific analysis on about why it was important to feminism. As a domestic violence survivor myself, I knew that domestic violence strips away so many parts of a woman, strips away your courage, your self-belief. It can strip away the work that you do. It can strip away your economic freedom. And for me, talking about how we fundamentally change how women we know that we need to trust women when it comes to money, means that women can be free of their abusers, would be able to step away from homes where they live with perpetrators of abuse. And I think that this fundamental shift where we trust and value women to liberate them, not just when it comes to these horrendous situations, but a genuine liberation on day-to-day work. As was said, you know, women almost do two jobs every single day. We do our day-to-day jobs, but we also do our jobs of care and household management. And there is so much more that we do that's going unpaid. And I've always been inspired by the work of people like Virginia Woolf, who talked about £500 for a room of her own. And to me, that is the very foundations. Maybe it wasn't quite a universal basic income, but it talked about what we deserve as women as a universal kind of right to our own liberation and freedom. And I look at all the systems that we have at the moment, and if we tinker around with the edges of a broken universal credit system that is really dehumanizing for so many people, we're not going to provide the liberation that women so desperately need.
Great, thank you, Amelia. What's your take on how basic income could help our fight to regenerate the environment?
I think it's at the core of our Green New Deal and has always been at the core of Green Party policy, because environmental policy and addressing inequality must be intertwined. And I think that making sure that we are, and as you highlighted, Barb, the aspects of intersectionality about who the poorest people in our communities are. It's not just women. Women of colour are impacted on a whole different level, and making sure that we take into account these inequalities is so vitally important. But it also means that we're able to talk about how people interact with their world in a very different way. I've been on low incomes and struggled to keep a roof over my head, and struggled not for a very short kind of period of time, but that struggle impacts what you're able to do. And I think that having a universal basic income and relieving people of that struggle means that we're able to engage people in a very different world, a world that would hopefully ensure that we've got the environment and social justice at its very core.
Great, thank you very much. Anne McLaughlin, you're from the Scottish National Party, and there's been a recent feasibility study into doing pilots up there. Do you want to just say a couple words about how you came to support the idea, and maybe after that about the feasibility study? I'll ask you an actual question then.
I mean, I can't remember when the first time I heard about this concept, but immediately it grabbed me, because I've always felt that the link between people who are on a low income and the state is a very negative one. I never liked the media coverage that came with, you know, people who were claiming so-called benefits. And having been long-term unemployed myself twice, and having grown up in a town where our industry was decimated and most of my friends' parents were out of work, and seeing the way that people's attitudes towards them, like they chose to be out of work, like the fact that they were receiving this money made them kind of othered them, if you like, then I've always been interested in finding a way of making it a right and making it something that doesn't discriminate. So I've always been very interested in it, but as everyone on this call will know, it was something that until very recently, and I would say even until maybe a year or two ago, people laughed at the fanciful notion that you could, you know, give everybody and enough of an income to actually have a decent life, but without them going out and cleaning the toilets for you. You know, it was considered to be really silly, and now it's common parlance. People are talking about it all the time. The situation with coronavirus, while we would never have wished it to happen, has allowed us to think actually you can come up with solutions. Even the thing about the government furloughing people and paying 80% of their salaries, who would have dreamt that this government or any government would have done that, but suddenly things are possible, and it's enabling people to think about the idea of universal basic income. And if you think back to 1942, I'm not suggesting I remember 1942, but the Beveridge Report was considered revolutionary, and it laid the foundation for the creation of the welfare state and the NHS. That was thought to be fanciful, but now it's just something we consider to be our right. And it was a reimagining of the social contract between the state and the individual, and that's what we need again, is another reimagining. And I think it's an idea whose time has come. The Scottish pilot, if it's allowed to go ahead, could tell us everything that we need to know, because I'm not sitting here saying this will definitely work. I'm saying this is an exciting idea that I want to work, so let's do the work to find out if it's feasible or not.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. That also reminds me of the fight that Eleanor Rathbone made for what's now called child benefit for family allowances. And what I found really interesting is she wrote a book in 1929 called The Disinherited Family, where she argued for family allowances to be paid to mothers. Mm. And a lot of the arguments that she had to deal with back then are very similar to the ones that we have to deal with now, you know, in terms of people pushing back on basic income. So thank you very much, Anne.
You're welcome.
Tchiyiwe, do you want to say a little bit about how you came to the idea? And yeah, start there anyway, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, happy to do that. So I work for Opus Independence, assigned to the UBILabs network. So we're a network of of individuals, academics, campaigners, counselors, think tanks and social entrepreneurs. We work to co-produce strategies and policy suggestions around basic income. So we're saying, let's test it. If its time has come, which we think it has, we should test it anyway. We should allow it for it to be tested, and we're quite strong on that. So I came to the universal basic income conversation a few years ago when a friend of mine asked me to have a think about it. I have to confess, I'm barely 10 years within this conversation. It's really new to me. And at the time I was working in the refugee sector, particularly working with women who have failed asylum seekers or seeking asylum, and talking to them about a protection gap that women fall into, because this asylum system, the process itself, is heavily inclined towards experiences of men when they seek asylum, and reasons why they flee their home countries. And within that framework, a lot of women that I worked with were actually working on a voluntary basis for this much needed information, and also the women themselves who are in the asylum system were barely making it on the little money that they're given. Mm-hmm. And so universal basic income to me just became that relevant and most important conversation to be having. And I was thinking, why not? And again, that me being of a migrant background and knowing just how easily it is for women and also the Black and brown communities to fall through protection gaps security, in financial security. This was a solution that I thought was much needed, and that's how I am here today.
Great, Tchiyiwe. So when you talk to, say, people on the African Voices TV slot that you do, or have you been talking about it there, or is it sort of I keep those things separate, or yeah?
I try to keep it separate, but then for me, what a universal basic income looks like means that it's a conversation that runs through everything that I do today. We're talking about, you've just described how Black people have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. That's a point. That's where a conversation about universal basic income comes in. So I can't disassociate my lived experiences with what a universal basic income could actually do for people that I speak to, even on television.
Great, thank you. Right, who's next? Oh yes, Polly. Do you want to just give a brief introduction how you came to the idea and how it relates to your experience?
Yes, so
the work that you do, yeah.
Yeah, I work at RISE, which is a domestic violence charity based in Brighton and Hove, and I'm actually the therapist there, trauma therapist, manage the therapy service. So I mean, I'm quite new to basic income, but obviously, you know, what we're aware of at RISE is that the economic barriers are what stops women being able to leave abusive relationships, and the day-to-day impact in terms of the trauma of staying in those relationships. And there's many reasons why women find it hard to leave. But the long-term mental health issues that are caused by the post-traumatic stress disorder that women experience when they've been stuck in danger, and part of what kind of causes PTSD, we now understand through the neuroscience, is that inability to get out of danger, inability to get yourself to safety, and so that, you know, it's kind of a key element, I think, is financial independence, and, you know, where economic abuse is one of the issues that can make it very difficult for women to have that independence. And, you know, I find it hard to believe that we're still having to talk about women having financial independence, but we are. Yeah.
Certainly. I mean, I was involved with the Wages for Housework campaign in the 1980s, and we also ran an advice service. And, you know, women there always, you know, particularly in the 80s, it was a little bit high. Child benefit was a bit higher relative to everything else than now. So there were a lot of women that used child benefit to get away from abusive partners. And then I've also, you know, later on, I worked with pensioners, and there as well, women actually use child benefit to not only support their children, but themselves, you know, so.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, you know, what we also are aware of is that even when they've got out of the relationship, they come to our refuge at RISE. You know, there's huge amount of administrative tasks to go through to try and get onto the benefit system, to try and get housing, and quite a few of them slip through the net and end up declaring themselves homeless. So, you know, it carries on. It could be so much simpler.
Right. Thanks very much. Maggie, back to you, over to you. Maggie Gordon-Walker, she runs a group called Mothers Uncovered. And yeah, so if you wanted to sort of talk about your basic income introduction and how you came to support it, and how do you think, I mean, I don't only want to ask you about Mothers Uncovered, but also you've been part of the creative industries for quite a while. So you could address that as well.
Okay, yes, so Mothers Uncovered, I set that up as a result of my own experiences of feeling panicky and isolated when I became a mother. We provide creative peer supports for mostly new isolated mums to highlight the importance of and address postnatal mental health. And all our activities are run by past participants. So for me, I'm also quite new to the basic income conversation. But one of the things I've noticed right from the start is, because we're a charity, our groups are all low cost. We have a lot of free places. So most of the women that attend our groups are not wealthy. They're struggling to make ends meet. And one of the things they worry about most is how to go back to their jobs when they don't feel ready. So they're worried about stopping breastfeeding if they're doing that, or if they want to continue doing that, is there somewhere they can express milk during the day so their breasts don't explode? Milk which will have to be thrown away. They worry about how their child will cope with not seeing them when they've seen them every day of their short lives up till now. And they worry how they'll manage a full day in an office or a shop or other workplace when they haven't had a full night's sleep in months. We live in a society that only values paid employment. I make sure in our groups that we don't ask participants when they're going back to work. Because raising a child, especially a newborn, when you've gone months without sleep, is some of the hardest work that there is.
Great, thank you. And do you want to say anything about how basic income might be able to help with the creative industries? I mean, we had an event a few years ago.
Yeah.
Brian Eno said that he was able to take a whole year off after art school in order to develop his music. And obviously he's paid back huge amounts of tax since then, okay? Or there's also J.K. Rowling's story, you know, of being on benefits and writing her first book, which became a huge, huge bestseller.
Yeah, I mean, it's well known in the UK we don't value the arts, that's for sure. I think I saw a chart recently, the UK was down the bottom of what it was paying the artistic professionals. We've got this insane thing now, they're opening up theatres but not allowing live performances, so I don't quite know how that works. Yeah, we don't value the arts. It's an essential part of the fabric of society, but it's not seen as being rewarded. So yeah, it would help people enormously, I think, in order to be able to carry on. I just want one tiny thing, because I don't get to say it later. My bit about mums is we're told that looking after our kids is just what we signed up for. We accept that and we want to look after them, but the values placed on it is so wrong. Because why is keeping a human alive, teaching it values, loving it, showing it how to look after itself, and all that entails not work, but for example, making an unsolicited phone call about claiming from the car accident that never happened, that is work, and that's paid accordingly. That was my little gag from the arts professional. Would have put that in there in case I didn't do it later.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Super. I don't know whether we've had any questions. Let me just have a look, or comments. Let's see. I'm looking at this, and nope, not yet. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted maybe to ask Anne McLaughlin a little bit, like with the feasibility study, like what kind of pushback has it had, and how's it going? Okay, I mean, I know it's been published, the draft form has been published, but it's not actually been accepted as such by the government. Is that correct? And what could people do maybe to, to support that, to support the Scottish government actually accepting the report?
Yeah, well, I think they don't receive the report in its full until the end of the month, which will be next week. But I'm not sure that the blockage, it's been supported by local authorities, National Health Service, and improvement studies, and the Fraser of Allender Institute looked at how to roll it out across the country. Child Poverty Action Group Scotland did the research on how it would work in practice and how it could impact on people, and the Scottish Government put £250,000 in to support that work. We need 3 levels of government to be accepting that this pilot can go ahead. So the local authorities will obviously accept it because they've done all the work on it. I can't imagine the Scottish Government not accepting it. If they haven't already, I'm absolutely certain they will. The blockage is going to be, and it may not be a blockage, but the biggest blockage is likely to be the UK government, because we need, in order to be able to pay people this money without it impacting on their housing benefit or their childcare costs, we need the UK government, need the DWP and HMRC to go along with it. However, the reason I'm saying it may not be a blockage is that there is now, it's becoming clear to me, there's a concerted effort from lots of different parties within the House of Commons and within the House of Lords. People are working together in pushing the UK government to support this. And I mean, if they feel, I know that the Tory government are not fans of this, they don't think it will work. But my suggestion, and everybody else's suggestion, is just let's see then. Let it happen and see. And I can say a bit more about how it would work if you want, but I don't want to take up too much time.
Well, one thing I was curious about is what kind of reaction do you get from your constituents to the idea?
Well, the only reaction I've had so far, because it's only very recently been published, the only reaction I've had so far is, please let it be in my area.
Okay.
I've really not had any negativity. I mean, I've had negativity in the past to the idea, to the concept, and it's along the lines of, why on earth should we be paying people for doing nothing? But there's not an awful lot of it, and as I said earlier, because it's now becoming much more commonplace to talk about it, it's now becoming something that actually maybe it could work, that people are less likely to push against it. And don't forget, if this goes ahead, if the pilot goes ahead, it will be in a geographic area, and everybody, regardless of their current income, will get it. There'll be 2 different studies, 2 different amounts, but everybody will get it. So even the people complaining that I go out to work, why have I got to pay for that person, they'll get it as well, which will probably shut them up for a few years.
Right. Yeah, no, it's something that people kind of forget about. And it's also, I think, it's kind of down to the way the tax system is kind of shifted from like corporation and dividend taxes to to income taxes on earned income. And it's really actually quite shocking how the level of tax on unearned income has gone down, you know, while taxes on earned income is, you know, on work. I mean, the government keeps saying that they want us to work all the time, right? And yet that's actually taxed more than other kinds of income.
Yeah, there's a lot of hypocrisy around, shall we say.
So great. Right, we do have some questions coming in. There's a question about whether basic income would cover teenage mothers. Anyone want to take that? Or Amelia, do you want to talk about that? Because I know the Green Party has a plan, you know, has its own kind of scheme for it.
I mean, we've got a scheme for universal basic income. On that specific question, it would obviously provide support to those who need it. And I think what's important about what we've created for what a universal basic income should look like is that nobody is left behind. So it might not just be the universal basic income itself, but making sure there's additional support and other forms of policies that mean that people are genuinely getting the support that they so desperately need. So I think that in terms of teenage mothers, they would certainly be getting the support they need. I don't think it's defined as universal basic income, but I think it's a very important point that we are extending it where it needs to be extended. And I wanted to just reflect on Maggie's joke, actually, because another thing that's kind of a good reflection of this is how terrible GDP is as a measure. We talk about the economy growing through GDP, and it doesn't address things like inequality and making sure that we're actually changing things. Health, for example, would be an incredibly important thing to measure right now. Yet we're told that for some reason, if I was looking after and caring for my parents, that it's somehow better for the economy that if I paid someone to do that rather than doing it myself. And I think there are so many aspects of understanding how the world of work and women in the world of work that are just reflected on an economic system that just doesn't recognize the work that we do in society.
Oh, for sure. Thanks. Let's see, the next question. How much do you think it should, oh, wait a minute. Oh yes, how would a woman in an abusive, controlling relationship access basic income? Just to say that hopefully everybody will be getting it already. And yeah, and I don't know if anyone wants to handle that question. Anne?
I'm happy to say a little bit about the pilot that's being proposed in Scotland. I mean, it would be cash payment. I don't actually mean banknotes, but it would be paid into an individual's account. So everybody would individually receive it, apart from children whose main carer would receive it. And just very quickly to say on the amounts that they're looking at in this pilot, there's two different amounts. So one study will give, on average, £84.54, it varies with age, £84.54 per person, but they would still keep housing benefit and childcare if they had that. And the other study will look at giving people £213.59 a week. Now, bear in mind, those of you that are in London, we would, for what you pay in rent for a one-bedroom house, we would expect a castle in Scotland for that. So £213 in Scotland is very different to what it is in London. But that's the sort of sums we're looking at, and every single individual would receive it individually.
Right.
With no conditions at all.
Right. I mean, I'd also say to that, I was on a really interesting panel in India last year where the woman who runs the Self-Employed Women's Association talked about how women working in either on farms or in small businesses, you know, street businesses in India, they didn't really consider themselves working until they got a basic income. And once they got a basic income, they could kind of somehow see their own work in the situation much more easily and much more clearly. Whereas before that, they said, well, they weren't working, even though they were doing, you know, sort of 16-hour days, you know, sort of helping out in the farm or creating things to sell on the street. So I think that's another aspect to it. Mm-hmm. Right. So what do you say to the argument that a basic income would keep women in the house?
Yes, I would.
Okay, Maggie, go for it.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, you might keep men in the house. Yeah, they might be the ones who might stay in the house and not be able to work. I mean, the fact that everyone is getting it means it's a level playing field. So, for example, the mums that come to our groups, there's always this sort of assumption that, oh, women are trying to have it all if they're having a child. It's just like this outrageous notion that they might be able to look after their child and also do something that's not looking after their child. But this would give women the freedom to do this. But it means, so at the moment, your only choice is probably not to work at all because the cost of childcare is so prohibitive, it just knocks out any of your earnings, or to put your child into full-time daycare. So you're only going to see them at weekends and be so shattered with trying to do everything else. So most of the women I know would like to do some paid employment and some looking after their children. But at the moment, most women, if you do that, you go back to your employer and manage to negotiate working part-time, you'll be doing the same job, but for less hours and less money.
Great,
I think.
thank you.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
can I just
I add to
go
for it
yeah,
too.
yeah. And also, I think what we've seen with pilots that have taken place around the world, they haven't shown that people actually get discouraged from working. What this would do is actually empower you with choice. That's what a basic income would actually do for women, rather than discouraging them, but they would still be empowered to have the choice. And the fact that it's paid to individuals means that they have the agency to make decisions even when they're in an abusive relationship, and they can escape that.
Great, yeah. And I would add, actually, it would really give fathers much better chance to actually do some care work themselves, all right? You know, and participate in the joys of caring. I mean, there's a lot to be said for the things that for the things you get out of actually looking after someone else. Right, so someone's asking here, with basic income, there wouldn't be joint claims, which might enable some women to maintain financial information. And yes, for that, yes, everybody would get an individual basic income. That's one of the reasons I was very attracted to the idea, because I've been both a claimant myself and also, you know, as a welfare rights advisor, I've seen the kind of nonsense that happens when people are trying to file claims for households. And that's kind of got worse with universal credit and not better. So, sorry, I'm having trouble keeping up with this now. So,
Barb,
yeah.
there's a question there about the Tribune article.
Okay.
From Jenny.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you can see it, but the argument was, instead of giving everyone a lump sum of money, would it be better to decommodify services so that people don't have to worry about paying for them in the first place?
Yep. Yeah, well, you know, to me, I mean, again, my answer to that would be we need to commodify ourselves first, and then we can start looking at decommodifying other aspects of society. But if anyone wants to come in on that, I'd really welcome it.
I haven't read the article, but I think it doesn't need to be one or the other. It can be, we can talk about both. But I think it's just to echo a lot of things that have already been said about how we change our relationship with work and what's good work and what people leave, go into the world of work for. It can completely change that relationship and enable things like flexible working, as been discussed, as well as change that relationship we have. And I think that that's why it is so fundamental, is because it breaks us out of a kind of current systems thinking about making sure that we all have this support network. So I think it's not just about one or the other, but this would genuinely transform our relationship with work and genuinely, as I said before, liberate so many people out of poverty. It's not a silver bullet by any means. And I think that's why it's important that we do talk about these other services as well. But it is a step towards making sure that people are liberated for their own choices about what their relationship with work.
Great, thank you. This hasn't been asked, but I mean, there's always a sticky question of like who it would go to in terms of immigration rules and all of that. I don't know, Tchiyiwe, if you want to talk about that, or how we kind of make a fight to make sure that everybody who's participating in the economy, which is most people, regardless of your immigration status, and we've certainly seen that, you know, with all the problems around Brexit, and you know, the need for the NHS, you know, has a need for people to come in and work for it. Yeah, sort of what's your kind of take on all those questions?
Yeah, I think to sort of summarize my answer, there's always this narrative that runs through a lot of arguments around welfare or just support systems that are supported by society. It's always about citizens, the citizens' income, and I think you can get around that with the argument that actually residents, as long as you're resident within this particular territory, then you should be able to get a basic income. Currently, asylum seekers are not allowed to work in this country. And most of them volunteer. They put a lot into the economy. And I would imagine that if they were empowered a little bit more, they would contribute highly to even better to the economy, the UK's economy. When you talk about households, 74% of households are single parent led households, but that's not different to what you would actually find in women led households for the refugee and asylum seeking communities as well. And if you empower a woman from a migrant background to look after, to be able to support her household with universal basic income, because each child will get that individual income as well, then there's a lot that you could do in the way of supporting mental health, and these are people who are resident in this country. And in Europe, if we're looking at the UK situation, in the Western world, basically, the regional disparities in terms of poverty are huge here. They're extreme, and it's one of the main reasons is because of that. The migrant population is disproportionately affected and impacted. So I think there is no strong reason why that cannot be for residents. It should actually be for anybody who is in this country, because we're part and parcel of this economy and this country and the systems. And like you said, the healthcare system is powered by the migrant community as well.
Absolutely. Anne, do you want to say something to that?
Yeah, could I just say that the pilot in Scotland, if it goes ahead, will be universal. So it will be the total population within the saturation site. And it says in the report, with no means testing, no restrictions by income, age or individual characteristics. So that would include migrant communities, regardless of their immigration status.
Oh, that's great to hear. Wow, excellent.
You can see why we're going to have problems getting the UK to agree to this, get the UK government to agree to this. I mean,
well, you could think of it as kind of an opportunity to make the case, that people are economically active. So why not support them, Right, there's a question here of any of the pilots looked at women specifically, and what were the results? We haven't covered that yet, have we? Sorry, I'm losing it slightly. I can kind of speak to that. Certainly the pilots in India, women in particular became, and also disabled people became much more active within both the society of the villages they were living in, and also economically, in the sense that because people around them had more money, many people formed their own businesses and started growing things, growing more nutritious food that people wanted and were able to pay for because they had a basic income. Like I said, with the meeting in India, it was reported that again, women felt, like they were actually working in a way that they didn't feel that they were working before, just simply because they had their own money. And I think that's really important. And also in Namibia, again, people, women in particular, formed, new businesses. And also crime went down, which I think was a big help, obviously was a big help for women. Right, okay, so we have, so there's another question, isn't a job guarantee better? There's been a lot of talk in the US about job guarantee, not so much here. Here it's usually the services are contraposed against basic income. With services, we always say, why not both? And why should we demand less than both? Rather than trying to get into an argument about whether income or services. Obviously, setting up an income for everybody would be probably faster than it would be to set up the services, set up better services. but so, yeah, anyone want to take the job guarantee question?
I wonder whether there's just something about choice in terms of that, that, you know, you know, we've got two, you know, Jung talked about us having two drivers. One is survival and the other is to be more fully who we are. And, you know, maybe there's something about, yeah, we might have job guarantee, but what kind of job and what's the impact of that work on people's mental health and well-being, and just to have, you know, what people with privilege have often, which is a little bit of freedom and choice in terms of what work they do.
Anne, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just that one of the attractions for me of a universal income is for people in the creative industries. So I went to drama school and left determined to go into acting, but it just wasn't for me, because I couldn't stand this bits of work here, bits of work there. And I was always scared that I wouldn't be able to pay my rent. So I just went and pursued normal work. But who knows, I could have been a really incredible actress. I probably wouldn't have been, but that's not the point. I could have been, and I could have given so much to the creative industries, but I didn't have the freedom and the space to do that because I couldn't afford to. Now, if you give a job guarantee, I'm not against job guarantees, but it would depend how it was done. And you were given a job guarantee to me as a young drama graduate, but that job was sitting in an office all day. How do I get to be creative? How do I get to pursue the acting work? So this is why I think one of the huge benefits is that we'll become much more creative collectively and individually when we've got the space to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree, Anne. I also went to drama school, and and it was, I have to say, sort of coming out mid-80s, it, you know, the benefit system really did support us, actually. For, you know, it was possible to be unemployed for a bit and survive, and I really believe that was a very rich time in British theatre. There was a lot of new writing. There was a lot of new talent coming through because of that support. You know, and it's a terribly scary time at the moment, seeing all the theatres closed, because it's from those kind of regional theatres that the next writer of the next big movie is growing and developing their craft, and the next, you know, big film star and the next big director, and the amount of money that comes back in to our economy through those talents having some opportunity to be playful and creative, and it's hugely important. It's very undervalued.
Yeah, Amelia.
Who knew?
Tchiyiwe. Amelia, do you want to speak, and then Tchiyiwe?
I believe Tim Rice was actually on getting some income support when he wrote was involved in Jesus Christ Superstar. So I mean, there's so many kind of ways that the arts support it. But I think this echoes, from my experience, this also echoes why we need to embed other forms of employment rights in this. Because when I just graduated, I feel that there was a point where there was a lot of people who were asking for people to come in and effectively be interns on no pay, but delivering work. And I think that there is a real point where we need to be making sure that when people do work, that they get paid for their labour. And I think this is why it needs to be part of a whole group of different policies, things like stopping 0-hour contracts that undermine many rights that people fought and died for, and making sure that young people aren't being exploited, or other people aren't being exploited for their labour in other ways in the name of training. Because although you might get a universal basic income, if you're doing the work, you should be getting fairly paid for it. So I think it's really important that we do encapsulate all of that, because the arts, once again, a group of people who are quite often taken for granted. I feel like coronavirus has shown that as well. The very people that have kept us entertained throughout all this haven't been given the support they need.
Yeah, sure. Tchiyiwe, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Barb. I just wanted to come in a little bit on the question of guaranteed job and that argument that's emanating from the United States. The thing is, you cannot negate the systemic failures of this concept of what a guaranteed job would look like, whether it's precarious work, underemployment, those are still problems that are going to remain within that framework. Dr. Martin Luther King's last book, what was it called? Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? One things in the racial injustice work that people do now always refers to, it's increasingly referring to a guaranteed income proposal that he suggested in his book as one of the simplest and most effective solutions to poverty. In a very similar way, quite recently, the Andrew Young campaign, Scott Stanton's, has also been talking about unconditional basic income. That's a running thread, and there's a reason for it. This has been going on for a long time. So it's not that there haven't been attempts to suggest that a guaranteed job is in existence, but it doesn't exist, and it's more complex. An unconditional basic income or a guaranteed income is the way that you could actually resolve all these challenges.
Great, thank you. Okay, there was a question here. Would UBI, especially if children get an amount, affect custody issues, especially with women suffering from domestic violence who already struggle to protect their children from abusive fathers? Is there a danger that it would make abusers more motivated to fight even more for custody to be able to claim their children's portion? I mean, I'll just sort of deal with that a little bit, just in terms of child benefit. And I actually had a struggle with my ex-partner over child benefit, okay? Because for a while we were actually pretty much equally sharing the care. And it's not that he was particularly abusive, he just wanted hold of the money. And actually, I mean, I think once it's established who is the main carer for the child, it's not actually that difficult for women to, you know, and if it's the woman, it's not that difficult to keep hold of it. My argument to him was always, well, it's going to be a lot more difficult for us to swap around, because he was also on the dole at the time. And yeah, I'm sorry, babe, but you know, I did spend the 9 months carrying this thing, and you know, had to go through. You know, it's just kind of my recompense for that. And actually, that kind of brings up another question. I don't know, Tchiyiwe, if you've kind of gone into this at all, but there's also obviously the question of reparations for colonialism and slavery. And do you have any thoughts on that subject, or how would you guys? Sorry?
I've got loads of thoughts on that, but I feel I keep answering questions, so I'll let other people give their thoughts and then I'll tell you mine.
Okay, great. Tchiyiwe, do you want to?
Can I comfortably just ask Anne to come in on that one, so I don't have to carry the burden of answering that question?
Sure, okay.
Thank you.
Fair enough.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were just putting the question out there generally.
No, I was, because, yeah, I mean, there's some questions about how much it would pay. You know, I mean, the thing is, like, if you want to know about, let me just say first before we get into this, all right? Anyone out there who wants to know about schemes, about ways to pay, about levels, all that kind of thing, okay, there's a whole lot of information on the Citizens Basic Income Trust website, on the UBILab network website. The Royal Society for the Arts has done a scheme for the UK. Compass has done several schemes, some of which are paid by income tax, rejigging income tax. Others are actually, they've come up with some thoughts on a sovereign wealth fund. Okay, so, you know, again, we're really here to sort of talk about basic income's potential impact on women's lives. The other sorts of questions are more general, and, you know, there's lots and lots of information out there, you know, which you can look up yourselves. So with the greatest of respect, I will not deal with any of those questions any further, okay? Okay, Anne, reparations, what are your thoughts?
So I'm on the board of Flag Up Scotland Jamaica. I'm just going to say this really quickly because I know we don't have much time. And Flag Up Scotland Jamaica exists to continue to highlight the legacy of Scotland's involvement in the Caribbean slave trade, because Scotland always thought it wasn't involved, thought it was England that did it all, but we were up to our necks in it. And you've got to own up to your past, and then you've got to make reparations for them. And some of what we talk about, we got Glasgow University to agree to make reparations, and that included financial reparations, but it's not always about financial, it's about lots of other things as well. Cultural, educational, there's lots of stuff going on at the moment, but as a point of principle, we absolutely do have to repair the damage that we did that benefited us and still is damaging those economies today.
Right. I mean, do you kind of, because there's a whole thing about Scotland suffering English colonialism. I mean,
well, there's that as well, but
yeah, okay.
No, I don't care about. It's not that I don't care about that. It's a separate argument. I do feel that Scotland sometimes, over the years, has not been able to do what Scotland wants to do. That's why I support independence, because England doesn't allow us to do it. That is entirely different to chattel slavery, and it's a separate argument. And people who say, but look what happened to us in Scotland. Yeah, we'll look at that a different day. Right now, we're talking about what we did, the part we played in colonialism and damaging those other countries and those people.
Let's see, I'd like to kind of explain, there's a question here about, let's see, how many female MPs, MSPs, ASMs, etc. are currently engaged for calling for a UBI? We've certainly seen quite a few people sort of come on board with it since the COVID crisis hit, who maybe, and I was really surprised on the one call with MPs that we had, that I was on, sort of early on in March, how actually people I didn't know were involved, were even interested in it, had actually thought very deeply about the subject. I mean, particularly Kate Ossamore in London, and who else really surprised me? I can't remember right now, that was a while ago. But yeah, so I think, more and more people are actually thinking about it. And I think the benefits are actually starting to become more apparent to more women, and hopefully more women in politics. So I don't know, Amelia, do you want to say anything about that, or how it's kind of, okay. Great.
Sorry, I just wanted to write something about colonialism, so I was going to put it in the chat. Sorry, I missed the question.
Okay. Oh, it's just about, how many women politicians are starting to get on board with the idea.
I think it's beyond women politicians, because I think that throughout coronavirus, what I've seen is more people talking about big ideas in a way that they never have before, and the ability, this has shown that our social security is not fit for purpose, and people are looking for other alternatives, and the universal basic income shows that. I see that there are more politicians who are engaging and believing in the need for change to happen, because I think that people are talking about going back to normal, and then everyone's thinking, but what the hell was normal about vast inequalities, about people struggling to put food on their table, child poverty. And I think that people, individuals as well as politicians, are thinking quite differently. And I think that the power of us as individuals is the most important thing, because let's remember our own power to petition, to lobby, to make politics doesn't just happen during elections. We must use our own power to use our voice at every single stage. And this is why the conversation becoming so popular in a way I haven't seen it before. I think someone said earlier, it's something that we used to get laughed at, but now it's really gaining gravitas in so many different areas. I just wanted to kind of direct that point on inequality, because the reason that we have racism and patriarchy is because of hundreds of years of systems that have been put in place. And I think that when we challenge poverty and challenge some of the effects that we have in our countries of inequality, and genuinely make sure that we question why this has happened, then we can create a stronger society. But I think that a universal basic income is just one way of challenging those inequalities that have been embedded for so many hundreds of years.
Great, yeah, that's certainly one reason why I'm into this. And yeah, as I said earlier, I mean, I really think that the symbolic value of everybody getting, the same amount of money dependent on age, children might get a bit less, older people might get a bit more. There was just a question in the chat box about retired people getting it. A lot of retired people already get the state pension, which is kind of like a basic income in some ways, but most of the schemes actually add a bit onto that. So yeah, so really the only differentiation would be age, really, and that can be done quite automatically, so that there's not more kind of bureaucracy attached to it. And I think another big point for me about basic income has, having been both a claimant and been a welfare rights advisor, is, not so much that it's going to reduce government bureaucracy, but more that it's going to reduce the bureaucracy for people who actually need the money. All right. And I mean, just the huge amount of money, and say, like, as Polly was talking about, people with PTSD and other invisible disabilities in particular have been very, very threatened by, and very threatened and made, destitute, like we saw in I, Daniel Blake, by the changes in the disability system. I mean, one thing that's really gone under the wire is the fact that, after you've had an assessment, your money, if the assessment goes against you, your money's cut off straight away. That didn't used to happen before 2013, okay? Before that, you had a month to challenge that decision, and your benefit would carry on. All right, and this is something that really rarely gets talked about, and I think is also something that basic income would really help people with. Of course, people with, disabled people do need extra money for their needs. But, to kind of completely cut people off from any money at all, which is really what's been happening, I mean, it's crazy, insane, it's cruel, it's demeaning. And the assessments that people have to go to are incredibly demeaning. The way you're kind of peered at by somebody who has never actually looked after you in your life. They make a decision based on spending an hour with you, and it sort of allows the DWP to then, go with that, with the assessor's view of things, rather than doctors who spent hours, days, weeks, months, years with you and know, your conditions very well. So that's one aspect we haven't really talked about, but I mean, I certainly feel that, a basic income, while, no, it itself would not cover the extra needs of disabled people. We need to keep those extra benefits, but we also, I think it would allow us to actually deal with, these assessments. This whole striver versus skiver conversation, which has been happening in this country for, oh God, I don't know, 10, 20 years. I mean, New Labour kind of had it. That's why they brought in the ESA. And then it's just intensified, under David Cameron and IDS. I think the fact that everybody gets something, I think will suck some of the bitterness out of that conversation, all right? And also make people much more happy, that, oh yes, well, you need a carer to come in, 2 or 3 times a week or every day. Let's help with that, okay? And whether that's a service that's provided by the state or whether that's something that they pay for, I think that can be then decided by the person, all right, rather than, well, this is definitely going to be a service. Because the other thing, sorry to go on a little bit, but I mean, the other thing with the universal basic service idea is that it's like this, it's kind of posed as, well, this is the collective, all right, and basic income is individual, all right. And I mean, the thing is, it's like when everybody, certainly my experience living on a council estate, being on benefits, where most of the single mothers on my estate had income support, was that it enabled us to help out each other. All right, it enabled us to create, a network of childcare so that we never actually paid for any childcare. I never paid for any. I mean, my son is now 24. I never paid for any childcare ever. All right, because of the support of the women around me who were, largely in the same position. So, I think that really a lot of people really underestimate what people would do with the money. And the ways, and the ways that they could get together about it, as well as, again, women really deserve their own money for the work that we do now, and also, and it has to be said, to enable men to do it too. And I certainly, certainly people my age, I'm nearly 60, men are more and more, particularly for older parents, having to look after their older parents, and that has to also be recognized. So, don't know if there are any more questions. We're right at the end. A couple things I wanted to say at the very end. I want to thank everybody so much for joining us in this conversation. I think it's been really good, and we've explored a lot of different issues here. Look out for our next Zoom events, which we'll have around the end of July. we're thinking about it being around issues around the environment. And if you want to keep up with news and our events nationwide, and events not just from Basic Income UK, but also from UBILab Network, from the Basic Income Conversation, and also from Citizens Basic Income Trust, which is an educational charity promoting the discussion of basic income, please sign up for our newsletter on basicincome.org.uk. And very, very finally, after all of this, I'm so pleased to announce the recent formation of UBILab women, who can be contacted on Twitter and Facebook. And I think their links are posted in the chat box. I'm not sure if that's correct. Anyway, not yet, not quite yet. But if you look up UBILab Women, it's new this past week or so, or 2 weeks. So if you're interested in helping them, or getting together with them, then please get in touch. And I have to say that while UBI will go to all people, we will only strengthen our movement by highlighting the many different perspectives of who it will affect and how. And I hope we've covered the women question, as they say, well this evening. And I thank everyone for taking the time out from this beautiful evening, at least in London. And hope that your weekends are wonderful. And as I say, do keep in touch. Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you.